Night fell over the Atlantic Ocean, not with peace, but with a symphony of death. Amidst waves as high as collapsing buildings, a battered, unmarked cargo ship struggled against a force-8 storm. The sound of screeching steel under the pressure of wind and water was haunting, but the most terrifying noise came from deep within the dark hold. A resounding roar, full of rage and fear. Keto, a male lion possessing the majestic beauty of the savannah, was imprisoned inside a cold steel container. He was not a passenger. He was a legal cargo on the way to a wealthy man with a taste for the exotic. As the ship tilted heavily to one side due to water flooding the hull, chaos engulfed the smugglers. In their panic, they fled, abandoning the precious cargo amidst the violent waters. A powerful collision between containers broke the lock on the door of Keto. The moment the ship began to be swallowed by the ocean, the instinct for survival rose stronger than ever. Keto lunged out of the iron cage, diving straight into the pitch-black, freezing water. Behind him, the final lights of the ship vanished, leaving the lion alone in a world of nothing but sea salt and vast darkness. The king of the forest was now just a small living being, struggling to keep his breath from being submerged by the waves. When the first weak rays of dawn pierced through the thick fog, the ocean had regained its deceptive stillness. The storm had passed, leaving the sea's surface as flat as a mirror, but full of lethality. In that immense space, Keto was still struggling. Over an hour had passed since the ship sank, and every moment for this lion was a torture of the flesh. Lions are powerful animals, but they were not created by nature to be swimmers in the middle of the ocean. The eyes of Keto were now bloodshot due to salt water irritation, and his breath was ragged and heavy. The majestic mane, once a symbol of power, was now soaked and heavy like a lead sheet, pulling his body down to the depths. The cold from the current began to soak deep into his bones, paralyzing the muscles that were only used to the scorching sun of the savannah. Each time Keto tried to paddle to keep his head above the waves, he felt his strength draining away. His world at this moment was only an endless, deep blue, with no sign of land, no sound of birds, only the sound of a heart beating rapidly and a chest tightening from exhaustion. The instinct of a ruler did not allow him to give up, but the logic of nature was whispering that death was only a matter of time. Precisely in that moment of near surrender, a bright red speck appeared on the horizon. It was Buoy 42, a maritime marker standing tall, like a tiny lighthouse in the middle of the sea. To a human, it was just a rusty piece of metal to mark a shipping lane. But to Keto, it was the only land left on Earth. Keto used all his remaining strength, pushing legs that were cramped from the cold to swim toward that glowing red object. The moment the front paw of Keto touched the hard metal shell of the buoy was an image both painful and sacred. Sharp claws, normally used to hunt antelope, now frantically scratched at the rusty iron covered in barnacles and green moss to find a grip. The sound of metal screeching under the claws of the beast created a chilling noise. He tried to pull himself up, slipped, then pulled again. Finally, Keto managed to crawl onto the narrow platform of the buoy. The lion lay flat, his body shaking uncontrollably with shivers. He clung tightly to the steel pole, his claws still digging deep into the buoy shell, as if fearing that this tiny island would also vanish. Keto raised his head, looking toward the infinite horizon and letting out a weak roar. That roar no longer held the pride of a top predator, but was a lonely cry of sorrow, a plea for help sent into the sea breeze. He sat there, an overthrown king, clinging to a block of iron in the middle of the ocean, waiting for a miracle that he did not even know existed. The patrol ship Sea Guard 01 cut through the waves on a mission to assess damage after the fierce storm. On the command bridge, the rescue soldiers were well used to searching for debris, life buoys, or drifting victims. However, when a young officer held his binoculars toward Buoy 42, he suddenly froze as if turned to stone.
Key commander, sir, over there.
There's a strange object on the maritime buoy, he stammered. When the camera lens zoomed in on the central screen, the entire cockpit fell into a breathtaking silence. A lion, a full-grown male lion, was holding on in the middle of the vast ocean. The initial disbelief was quickly replaced by urgency. However, approaching this target was a challenge without precedent in rescue history. Large swells, the aftermath of the storm, were still surging dangerously, causing the red buoy to bob violently. As Sea Guard 01 drew near, Keto did not see the rescuers as saviors. In a mind full of trauma, that giant iron ship was the monster that had imprisoned him in darkness and pushed him into the sea. Keto bared his teeth and growled, amber eyes streaked with blood staring at the rescue team with extreme hostility. He bristled his mane, trying to stand firm on the narrow buoy platform, ready to attack anyone who dared to enter his final boundary. Time pressure weighed on the shoulders of the patrol team as the radar announced a whirlpool moving closer. The buoy 42 showed signs of a loose anchor, starting to drift freely. "We cannot use tranquilizers," the captain ordered. This was a difficult decision. If tranquilized, Keto would fall unconscious in a few minutes. But when his muscles relaxed, he would slide off the buoy and sink to the bottom of the sea before the rescue team could reach him. They had to save him while he was still conscious or never.
Confirmed.
The rescue
Clear
team
deck.
began to
Proceed with the
implement a
rotation.
bold plan. They used the crane of the ship to lower a specialized iron cage filled with protective netting down near the water surface. A piece of fresh meat was strategically placed inside the cage as an invitation, and also to distract the attention of the beast. The wind began to blow harder. The cage hanging on the cable swayed with the rhythm of the waves, creating a dramatic scene. Each time the cage collided with the buoy, creating a clanging metal sound, Keto stepped back, his claws tearing the red paint, his roar echoing across the sea area, expressing the conflict between the instinct to protect territory and his stomach growling from hunger and thirst. The rescue now became a battle of wits. The patrol ship had to keep enough distance to not flip the buoy, but also be close enough to control the crane precisely to every centimeter. The rescue workers held their breath, sweat pouring down their faces despite the cold at sea. They were not only facing a wild beast, but were also racing against death as the buoy began to spin with the whirlpool. All hope was now concentrated on a fragile moment of connection between man and beast. In the extreme tension of the rescue, when mechanical methods seemed only to aggravate the fear of Keto, a quiet change took place. Mark, a seasoned member of the patrol team who had spent many years volunteering at wildlife conservation centers, realized that they could not subdue Keto with steel or coercion. He signaled the team to lower the crane and asked the captain to reduce the engine noise to a minimum. The space between the ocean suddenly became unusually quiet, leaving only the sound of waves lapping against the side of the ship and the heavy, gasping breath of the lion. Mark stepped to the edge of the ship, carrying no weapons or sticks. He knelt down to reduce the threat of height and looked directly into the amber eyes of Keto, which were glowing with alertness. Between the human and the beast at this moment was only a few meters of cold seawater. Mark began to speak, his voice low, steady, and gentle like a lullaby. He did not give orders, he was just talking. He told Keto about the distant savanna, about the warmth of Mother Earth, and about a promise that the torment had ended. Lions are animals with high intuition. In that moment, Keto suddenly stopped growling. His ears, which had been pinned back, began to move, turning toward the peaceful sound from the stranger. The fierce gaze, containing the trauma of days imprisoned on the smuggler's ship, began to soften. He saw in the eyes of Mark not the greed of poachers, nor the threat of another predator, but a deep empathy. An invisible but strong bond was established between two species that had never belonged together. Keto looked down at the whirlpool lurking beneath the buoy, then looked back at the open rescue cage. He seemed to understand that this was his only chance to survive, to be able to set foot on dry grass once again. In an act that made all members on Sea Guard 01 hold their breath, Keto slowly loosened his claws from the steel pole of the buoy. He no longer tried to cling to that rusty iron block. The lion moved toward the edge of the buoy, gave a small shiver, and then placed one front paw on the floor of the rescue cage. When the entire massive body of Keto was settled in the cage, he did not struggle or try to attack. He huddled up, resting his head on his two front paws, tired eyes half closed, as if he had finally found a safe shelter after so many storms. Mark continued to whisper words of comfort as the crane slowly lifted the cage into the air. The moment the cage touched the steady deck of the ship, a collective sigh of relief echoed from the rescue team. There were no victory cheers, only tearful eyes looking at the exhausted king. Keto had chosen to trust humans once more, and that was the greatest victory of this rescue. After many weeks of special care at a coastal rehabilitation station to treat wounds from sea salt and pneumonia, Keto was finally healthy enough to undertake the most important journey of his life. A military transport plane carried the lion across thousands of miles of airspace, away from the haunting ocean to return to the intense sun and the rich scent of the African soil. The destination was a vast national nature reserve, where golden grasslands stretched to the horizon. The day of the release of Keto was a brilliant afternoon, when the sunlight dyed the entire space red, creating a glorious scene as if to welcome a king returning from death. The truck carrying the iron cage stopped in the middle of a peaceful valley. Mark, the rescue soldier who had created that fateful bond, was also present. He stood at a distance, quietly observing his special friend. As the cage door slowly slid open, a silence covered all those witnessing. Keto did not rush out immediately. He cautiously stepped 1 foot out of the cage, feeling the first contact between the sole of his foot and the warm, dry ground. It was not cold metal, nor was it the precarious water surface, but the stability of the old continent. He took a very deep breath, filling his chest with the smell of dry grass, of dust, and the heat of the savanna, sense that at one point he thought he would never see again. Keto stepped out completely, his majestic figure silhouetted against the sunset sky. He took a few steps, feeling again the strength in every muscle fiber that had been recovered. Then a miraculous thing happened. Keto stopped. He did not run away immediately, but slowly turned his head to look back at Mark and the rescue team. In that brief moment, the amber eyes no longer had fear, no longer had hatred, but only a strange serenity. It was a look of gratitude, a wordless farewell for the humans who did not abandon him in the deep blue of the ocean. Keto let out a resounding roar, shaking the entire space. This roar was completely different from the weak cry for help on Buoy 42 or the angry sound on the patrol ship. This was the roar of power, of freedom, announcing to the whole world that the king had returned to his kingdom. After that roar, Keto turned his back, taking powerful strides into the bushes and disappearing into the golden silk of the dry grass. When the figure of Keto completely merged into nature, a small but heavy line of text appeared on the screen. The ocean is not the home of the king of the forest. Please return wildlife to where they belong. The story of Keto is not just a miracle of survival, but also a testament to the power of empathy. Amidst the dark sides of human greed, there are always hearts ready to face danger, to correct mistakes, to keep this world still, having majestic roars in the jungle instead of the deadly silence in the middle of the sea.